Okay, I'm going to go over this question and how to answer it. Financial arguments to improve health and safety. That's the task. Based on the scenario only, what financial arguments in relation to accidents could you use to convince directors that health and safety needs to be improved? So what I've done is gone through the scenario, reading it carefully and sort of highlighting bits that I think I can use to help me make these financial arguments. Well over 10 highlights. You can either highlight it or just do a quick copy and paste into a blank Word document, however works for you. I'll go through a few of them just to train you in how to get the marks and point out a few common mistakes that people seem to be making. Improve the reputation of the organisation. As I was reading it, I highlighted that. What you've got to be careful of, you're making observations rather than the arguments. So you're making observations, but you're not backing it up and making an argument. And this is covered in the question hint that we give on the during the lesson. So for example, if I just put improve reputation of the organisation, that on its own, is not going to work. Because it said here, the bigger passage is, the directors do not believe that health and safety is a full-time job, but they hope that you will improve the bakery's health and safety performance, learn lessons from the recent serious accident, and most importantly, improve the reputation of the organisation. Okay, I've highlighted that because improving the reputation of the organisation will or could lead to increased business, more clients and customers being willing to use the organisation, less likely to lose important contracts because of a poor reputation. So there's all sorts of things additional that you could say to kind of make the argument. Don't just leave it as just a very short bullet. Moving on to the next one. They've told you that there is no budget for health and safety, but if something is needed, you should present an argument for how it will improve profit. So they're mentioning profit there, the directors. The reason I highlighted that is when I read it, I thought that, well, what we often say in health and safety is that health and safety is just as important, if not more important, than profit. Never mind how it will improve profit, never mind that. Health and safety in its own right is just as important as, if not more important, than profit. Now, is that a moral argument or a financial argument? Well, it's both. There's a bit of an overlap. You've got your moral arguments, legal arguments, financial arguments. So even if there is a moral element to an argument, as long as there's a financial element too, it's valid. So make sure that you are making valid financial arguments and don't stray too far into legal arguments or moral arguments, unless, of course, as I've just said, that there is a financial element to it. The next highlight I made, you're told that quite a lot of people have received first aid training, but it was a long time ago, and many of those trained have since left the organisation. So many of those trained have left the organisation, so there's high staff turnover. It would appear from the scenario that suggests that there's high staff turnover. High staff turnover, as we know, is expensive. It's cheaper and more economical to retain staff than it is to replace staff, because you have to train them up then in how to do the things that the staff have left already knew how to do. So improving health and safety will increase the likelihood that more staff will stay with the organisation because they feel that they're being looked after. It's a better working environment. And by retaining staff at a higher rate, it will save the company money. That is a financial argument. Don't just point out that lots of staff have left and leave it at that. You're not going to get a mark for that. You need to make the argument to go along with the observation. Next one, the duty shift manager is sitting at their desk surrounded by paperwork, looking stressed. So the reason I highlighted that was that obviously there is a poor culture. If they're looking stressed, it kind of links in with the other point that I previously made. A poor working environment means that people are more likely to leave, or even if they stay but they're not happy and they're stressed out, they are not going to be as productive. If they are not as productive, then that is a financial burden on the company, because they're paying staff to not do as an effective job because they are stressed. Improving health and safety will, obviously, a good health and safety management system will look at stress, depression, anxiety, the mental health aspect of it as well. So this is another financial argument that can be made. The next one, however, you've heard from other workers that accidents and near misses frequently occur. So accidents cost money. We know this. Why do they cost money? Well, because it takes people out of doing the job. They're going off sick. They're making compensation claims, etc., etc. Near misses also cost money because they might also need to be investigated, etc. And all the costs that are associated with that you could go ahead and talk about in your answer. But the fact that they're frequently occurring as well means that basically money, the organisation is already hemorrhaging money. They might not even be able to see that money disappearing because there's no line item on their budgets, for things that have to be done in response to even near misses. This is where a health and safety manager, a good one, can come in and make a solid financial argument that gets the directors to realise that, improving health and safety will have a positive financial impact. It's not an expense, it's an investment. The next highlight was they also remarked that as the machines are quite old, they frequently need parts replacing. Again, just to repeat myself, don't just point out that machinery frequently need parts replacing. That's just an observation. The argument would be that by improving health and safety, by having regular planned preventative maintenance conducted, is often cheaper in the long run than reactive maintenance, waiting for a machine to break down. When a machine breaks down, it might cause a delay to production, which causes further losses to the business. But by scheduling in planned preventative maintenance during periods where the machines are not in use, could be a cheaper option than waiting for machines to break down and then carrying out the reactive maintenance. Again, don't just point out that the machines are old and frequently need parts replacing, because you're just regurgitating things then from the scenario. You're not actually adding anything. You've got to make the argument as well if you want to get the point. Moving on, these are where most of the points were made. This is where most of the highlights came in, is in the very last paragraph. Following the accident, the bakery was closed for 2 weeks. Hopefully by now it's obvious that you're not going to get a point by just pointing out that the factory was closed for 2 weeks. You've got to put an argument to that. It's pretty obvious what argument you can make. Being closed for 2 weeks is going to have a massive impact on the financial performance of the company. 2 weeks is a long time. They're not going to fulfill orders. They're going to annoy their clients and customers. They're not going to want to do business with the company in the future. There might be contract penalties that are imposed if the bakery can't fulfill what it was contracted to do. All sorts of things you could say. The other highlight I made in this sentence was that an investigation took place. Investigations are expensive. Why? Well, because they often involve staff, sometimes management staff. Well, they are going to involve management staff taking time out of their normal day-to-day tasks to investigate the incident. No money is being made by investigating an incident. The associated downtime caused many missed production deadlines, Missed production deadlines are going to be expensive for the company because a deadline is a deadline. If it's not met, there is usually some sort of penalty to be paid. Loss of contracts is going to have a financial impact on the company because customers are going to see or clients are going to see that the company that they're dealing with has had fatalities. This is a serious incident, and they're not going to want to be associated with companies that have had fatalities. The organisation, the directors and duty shift manager were all prosecuted for breaches of health and safety legislation. This touches upon the point I made towards the beginning of the video, where we're talking about moral, legal and financial arguments. Because you could say, well, this is clearly a legal argument, but it could be fines as well. That's usually the most common punishment that the courts dole out, is actually fines. A criminal law punishment, but obviously because it's a fine, it's going to have a financial impact on the business. The avoidance of future accidents by getting health and safety sorted is going to avoid those financial penalties that are imposed by the courts for any future accidents or incidents or health and safety breaches that might happen if the company do not respond positively and get health and safety sorted. The organisation was fined £350,000. By pointing that out in your answer shows that you're not just saying the company might want to avoid large fines. By pointing out that the company has actually already been hit with a £350,000 fine makes the argument much more relevant. And in our case, because this is an exam, we're also proving to the examiner that we actually use information from the scenario. The other thing is different to fines. This is costs of £250,000. This would be additional to the fine. This is what the courts often do, is they'll issue the fine and then on top of that they'll slap on the cost. This is the court costs and the costs associated with costs incurred by the other side. You could add into that, well, what other costs can you think of? Lawyers, health and safety consultants might need to be brought in. All that is involved with a case going to court. Think of all the costs that mount up as a result of that, in addition to the fine that is going to get given out by the courts. Since the accident, the bakery has lost bread orders. Lost bread orders means lost money. The fact that that has already happened ought to be a wake-up call to the organisation. They're going to have to spend money now in compensation to the companies that further on down the supply chain have had disruptions to their operations. They might be able to claim compensation for their business losses. Also making gaining new business much more difficult because of poor reputation. So these are just a few ideas, and like I say, some of these are covered in our feedback that we give, and also the hint to the question. Here's a reminder of the question hint that we give. The question seeks brief technical points such as sick pay, investigation costs, fines, all of which we've talked about now. The scenario may reveal examples of these theoretical points, such as the employer receiving £350,000 fine. We've discussed that. Identifying this would merit an extra mark, i.e. identifying that the company has received that fine. The question includes a specific note directing you to base your answer on the scenario. The note may take various forms. This is just an example of one form it can take. Generic answers from the internet or a textbook will not gain marks. This is in the question hint. If you respond with an answer like large fines, you will not be awarded a mark. However, if you respond with information that applies to the scenario alone, such as a result of this accident, the company was fined £350,000, linking it to the scenario, large fines like this can be avoided in future by making improvements to health and safety. An argument to back up the observation, then a mark would be awarded. Remember also that it's financial arguments you're trying to make. If you include moral arguments and legal arguments, you haven't read the question properly. This is if you're including arguments that are only moral arguments or only legal arguments. You have to make sure there is overlap, as I said. You have to make sure that you're making financial arguments as well. Another thing is not reading or understanding the scenario problem, because we're getting people saying that there's going to be medical expenses for the injured workers. The injured workers are dead. So you haven't read the scenario, or you've read it but you haven't understood it. The dead people cannot bring compensation claims. The dead persons, the victims' families might bring compensation claims. So when you're making your arguments, make sure they're proper, coherent arguments, otherwise you're not going to get the mark. If you didn't score well in this question, reflect, figure out why your answer didn't score high marks. Take on board the feedback that you will have received and make sure that your next answer is hitting the points that I've just discussed in this video.